All right, so before we get started with all of the actual lessons, just a few notes on what's going on this week. So we're going over two different things that allow us to kind of sculpt in more detail. One of them is the Poly Sculpt tools, which we're starting a new tab, hooray. And then the other is something called Soft Select, which allows you to have a fall off in your selection where you select one component and then other components around it get sort of selected. It's kind of like having a feathered edge on your brush in Photoshop, only for how much you move things. Um, all right, and so and this was done with the Polysculpt thing. So this was in part inspired by when I was modeling during our quote unquote class last week, and I made a mess of my blushy. And my first thought was, oh yeah, I'll just grab the relax tool. And then I was like, oh, wait, students don't know what that is. That doesn't seem fair. And so I decided to make that the subject for this week because if I was going to use it to fix my model, well, gee, that should be an option for you all to fix your models, right? And the other thing was that this is a pretty decent tool to have for any type of soft sculpting generally. And it also seems like a pretty good thing for us to learn on remote learning, which is not what our game plan was for the semester. So this is sort of instead of a heavy day of rendering, this is a last day of modeling. So yeah, this will probably be the last day we learn any new modeling tools, and then we will be moving on to some materials things before we do our final. Um, all of these things, let me bring this over here. So Autodesk, I have links to all of these pages about sculpting tools and soft select and things like that. But for the nitty gritty description of how things work, Autodesk has all of that. But it's just a really large glossary of terms. So I've got links to the specific pages that would be, I think, of use to you. One last thing about these files. So building is a different idea from sculpting, and building is what we have been doing basically all semester. Yes, there is some sculpting of vertexes and things like that, but we're moving the way we're moving things around, the way we're extruding and inserting edge loops, all that is more building, constructing of things. Um, and that's very different than when we bring in the sculpting tools, and you can already see there's more resolution on this, and the way I shape things works out differently. It doesn't leave any history. Um, there's no new history from here, except for the fact that I was splitting things while I was sculpting, but the sculpting itself doesn't leave any particular history. Um, and if your file, by the way, if from working at home, if your computer's being taxed, you could always edit delete by type history in order to make things run a little bit faster. Now, here's the thing though, because sculpting is so different, once we do that, yes, we can extrude on here, obviously, and things like that, but you reach a certain point where like getting your old model back isn't as easy, right? If I'm at the stage where I have been extruding stuff, this still looks like the hexagon I practically started with for the body, and then this is just where I messed up. So if I needed to, I could go into face mode, and I'll turn off symmetry for a second, and I could just delete some things, right? I could pretty easily delete down to this last edge here and start again. Um, that's not true once you start using all these sculpting tools. That line between things gets a little bit more difficult. This is a completely different shape than this now. So you can see I have two files. Before I started sculpting, I saved as. So I built out as much as I could, just generally building, mucked this all up, said, no, I got to switch to sculpting tools. And so I said, file, save scene as, and this might crash now because I'm recording the screen. There we go. And I called it Grunty Sculpt. And so I started a new file. I probably should have called it Grunty 2 or whatever. But I started a new file and I still have the old one. So if I go in with my sculpting tools and I completely wreck it, I can always go back. So forget infinite undos and things like that. Yes, that's great. But what if I save the file, right? And I have to close out? What if Maya crashes? It is good to have a living history of some sort. That is a thing, whether it's in a new file or the same file. This is a thing that people do all the time, and it's sort of like having your own like cloud backup or I'm not sure. It's making your own history outside of Maya. So I highly recommend when you get to for the homework, using the sculpt tool to change things, um, don't risk all the work you did for the work you're going to do. File, save as, start a new file, and then start sculpting, right? And then start doing whatever you want. Because if you muck it up, you can go back to this and then try again. All right. So I highly recommend saving as to create a file history for you to work with. And for the record, I also did that with the tutorial. So I had a start and middle and end for the pig, although I messed up when I saved one of them, so I don't actually have the start. But that was my intent. So this is something I do all the time. Just as a matter of course, it is something I would recommend for you as well.